Hey guys, this is James, and I'm here again with Garrett.
Hey guys.
So today we have another special episode, backed by popular or maybe more unpopular, in some of your cases, demand. We are bringing a long episode where we are not drinking. We're talking about, I think, for me, one of the more interesting topics in Pu'erh. We're going to be talking about Taobao. We recently released a report where we drank through a bunch of teas from a specific Taobao vendor, MXT, Mingxing Tea, which is based over in Guangdong, I believe. And so we released a bunch of tasty notes for that. But we're going to be talking about Taobao more generally, just like what our experiences have been, what's good about it, what's bad about it, and will we be using it in the future. So, why don't we kick it off with Garrett? What's been sort of like your relationship with Taobao? How have you like when you first started using it? What was your experience interacting with it, and like what were like some of your first orders?
Sure, yeah. So my experience with Taobao, I think, has been pretty good, but maybe not great. In terms of my experiencing with like ordering and my experiences with like the quality and the variety of tea that I was able to find. And initially when I was starting out with Taobao and mostly looking at MX, because MX has a really well done kind of Taobao vendor website, so it's really easy to navigate. They're very consistent in terms of how they do their formatting. I was looking at their stuff, a lot of Jaguan, a lot of kind of smokier teas from mid-2000s, and I did a lot of sampling, just like getting smaller cakes, getting 2-0s, and lately, I've also been getting into some more of their actual samples that they've been making. They make like 10-gram samples now, so that's been really helpful. I would say early on in my Taobao experience was probably like a real high point, positive for me, because I was finding new things. I was cross-referencing Western vendors and kind of seeing what they were bringing on that was kind of semi-aged and seeing if it was available through other vendors, and kind of there's this sense of risk. I don't speak Mandarin, and I don't, so I always had to be using like Google Translate, full Chrome page, like translating devices, and there was always kind of like this kind of, I can't think of the character, but like the Dan Brown Da Vinci Code, like let's decipher what's going on here. Is this actually the proper like translation or not?
You get to learn like all of the bad translations from Google Translate.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me also, I don't read Chinese either, and it's stuff like you learn like Big Benefit stands for Dai.
Right.
Shimon Seki, which I don't know what the hell that is still. I've been like
a
looking for
prefecture
this
in like Japan.
Yeah, I think it's something Japanese. It is, but it's really bizarre, but that's what Shaguan gets translated to.
Yeah.
There's like Sea Factory. There's all kinds of fun stuff out there. Fun times to be had just with the Google Translate of the different things. Yeah. Lots of top grade, lots of high grade type stuff.
Yeah, very, very aged. I would say in terms of when I was first starting out and just going between Google Translate and the website Babbelcarp, which is a great kind of tea lexicon online. Definitely check it out. You can just kind of copy and paste the headers of certain pages and certain items like tea cakes and stuff, and just kind of it'll kind of sort out what it can't read, but then it'll give you an idea of kind of like, oh, okay, so that's like Pu'erh, and that's Bing, oh, that's like this big, and it's from this area, and it's probably from this vendor or factory. So initially I think it was very helpful for me to be on Taobao and kind of learn more about the the like factory.
So it's almost
experience.
useful paired with sort of BabbleCarp just to learn some like the tea lexicon.
Right, yeah, and kind of increase my vocabulary and just understanding about like what's available out there. So
Yeah. And how did you find out about MXT originally?
That is a good question. I feel like we together were like looking around at certain TZ and just kind of doing the whole cross-referencing thing.
Right.
I can't specifically remember how like what tea it was that brought me there, but initially, I don't know. I've always had pretty good experiences getting stuff from them, so I've been pretty consistent.
Yeah, and I guess I do remember how I first got introduced to MXT, and it was through looking. Basically, what I was doing was I was looking at teas, specifically semi-aged teas that were offered by Western vendors. I was taking that, so let's say it was Shaguan. I was typing Shaguan into BabbleCarp, was getting the Chinese characters for Shaguan, and then I was pasting it into there, and then like it's obviously a little bit more complicated. You would get the characters for something like Tuji, which is like sort of like stands for the grade of it, typing in the year, stuff like that, and then plugging that into sort of your Taobao search bar. It's a way to search. It comes with a lot of pros and cons for sure, and that's how I ended up landing on MXT. I think in both of our experiences, we found teas from Western vendors. Unclear if it's the actual same source, if they just bought it off of Taobao, but Taobao vendors selling the same thing, oftentimes for a similar price, and oftentimes for a lower price. And I think that's how I ended up landing on MXT. I found a couple common teas that were sold by them as well as certain Western vendors, and they were sold for less on MXT, so I decided it was worth a gamble.
Yeah, definitely. And I think initially starting out, that gamble in certain ways definitely paid out. And I think the increased variety too was really helpful, at least for me when I was initially starting out with Taobao. One thing that I kind of found like difficult early on was kind of working with agents and working with agent websites. Some websites are English translated, others aren't, and having portals there that were easy to use and where I was making sure that I was ordering the right amount of things and that it was getting drop shipped to the correct place was also equally like important, but also very kind of like it put me on edge, because I think that's like one of those larger things that people are like, ooh, I don't know about, like I can't get it directly from them, or if I do, it's like through some like a AliExpress kind of thing, and
you have to jump through some hurdles in order to get your tea and the agent business. So thankfully, tea is certainly not the biggest thing that Westerners are buying on Taobao. In fact, if you go to any of these agent sites, I think you'll find like quite an array of different things. Lots of cosplay type stuff, cheap clothes. I think tea would probably be like maybe like 7th or 8th on like the list of things that people are buying from China.
Right.
So it's not the highest thing, but people like these agents, there's a number of them. It's a established business for probably a number of years now. I mean, you could go way back and look at like Half Dipper Hobbs posts or Marshall's posts. I think probably at this point 5-6 years ago, and see sort of like that they are ordering from Taobao. Half Dipper in particular had to use agents because he's based out in the UK. So like initially I guess we'll tackle the topic of agents now. So I mean, agents, there's a lot of sneaky ways that they make money, all the way from the exchange rate to like little fees here and there. So if you are someone that hates getting dinged on little fees and stuff like that, Taobao can be a very painful experience if you don't know what to expect. But I think in a lot of cases you come out quite a bit ahead, even with all these fees, just because like the markup for some of these teas can be quite high.
Right.
So the
Yeah.
Taobao price might be a third or half of what it costs in the West, and maybe you get like these 3%, 4%, 5% fees, and you end up paying, 25% more of the listed cost of the tea. Well, that amount could still end up being quite a bit less than you would if you just paid, so let's say $30 for the Taobao tea plus $10 of fees and shipping versus $60 or $70 to buy it straight from a more friendly U.S.-based source.
Right, exactly. And I think when you're kind of talking about like what's on Taobao and what you see most frequently people buying when it comes to using agents, I think tea, especially Pu'erh, isn't one of those things that really has percolated very much in terms of easy, accessible Western markets like eBay and Amazon and stuff. Like, whereas like I could find like a ton of like car charging devices on Taobao and on Amazon, and the margins would be really close. But like, would I find that like 2007 MX, or not MX, but Jaguar, that I was like looking for with the specific like thick paper wrapper? Probably not on Amazon. So that's where you can get those deals and can get those better kind of percentages.
Right. I think it's also important to note that like I definitely don't advocate searching and just buying random stuff off Taobao. I mean, in many ways it works sort of like any other thing works, where it's like there are good vendors and there are terrible vendors, or vendors that you're not going to get exactly what you looked for. So in Taobao, we have a couple vendors that we know and that are established for us. So that mitigates a lot of the risks there. So MXT is one that we've mentioned time and time again, actually.
Right.
Especially on TeaDB, just because I've ordered from them. So and I know about what to expect. It's less of a gamble, I guess you would say. So so you have an idea of sort of like the storage that they usually have and stuff like that. And
they're consistent, and it's easy to navigate, as I said kind of like earlier, compared to other stores where they might have like full blown images in their post, and like they'll show the wet leaf and they'll show like the dry leaf, and it'll be great, and but then they won't have any like translatable text, and then I'm like, oh well, I don't really know what this is, so I'm like I can guess probably what it is, but like I'm not going to take that risk, especially if it's like $100 after all those fees or something.
Right. And so it can be helpful, I think, in Taobao to have someone to split orders, just splitting the risk and stuff like that. So Garrett and I have done a fair amount of that between each other. If you have the will, you can, or the connections, you can split it across multiple people. You might have to send out some packages or whatnot. We've done that a couple times, but it can be a real pain in the ass. So but those are ways that, like, if you can't order samples, then you can get around it by sort of like coordinating these things.
Get tea friends in around where you live, and then you're
do
good to go.
Group buy. And let's stay on the topic for agents just for a moment more. I mean, I started with Taobao Focus. Frankly, they charge a lot. They give you a terrible exchange rate. What agent do you use now?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that in the past I used Taobao Ring as an agent, and right now I would actually need to pull up the agent that I use right now, because they just changed their name about 2 months ago.
So Garrett is looking up the agent that we use, which used to be called ... Buy.
Right.
Yeah, and now is, I believe, called Super Buy.
Yeah,
and I guess
yes.
And so, why do we like this agent?
So I like to use Superbuy and or .buy as I've known it in the past, because they have a really easy to use system in terms of copying and pasting the correct listing page from Taobao. Then they have a really smart kind of software in terms of what they can really recognize different colors, different sizes of availability and quantity. So it's all kind of smart. Initially, it was not a very English friendly website, so there was still translation going on there, but the cost savings in terms of other more English friendly agents was great in terms of just they had a better exchange rate, they had less fees in terms of transferring from PayPal into their kind of like website's wallet, and then going back and transferring extra cash that I would have back. So it was a pretty good website.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Garrett. I think Superbuy is by far the best agent I've used. I definitely recommend them over the other agents I've used, which include Taobao, Focus, Taobao Ring, and I use something else, Cheap Agency or something like that. And I think Garrett highlighted those reasons. You save a lot on the exchange rate. I trust them much more to be they just seem to be more transparent operation. Some of these sites you could order and they'll just like pocket sort of the difference of the discount and stuff like that. They're good about taking pictures. But maybe we should also just go back a little bit and say how these agents actually work, just
Sure.
like as a business.
Yeah, so I would say in terms of like how I interface with them, some agents will have you you'll need to get your money into them initially, right? So there's a way of you either transfer with like either a bank transfer or PayPal into their kind of like ecosystem, and different agents have different ways of doing that.
PayPal is usually fine, which is usually what we do.
Right. And so once it's there, we can use kind of their website and kind of copy and paste into and create kind of a shopping list for them to then go out and purchase those items for us and keep in their personal warehouses. I would say that once you have like a solid amount of like tea that you want to buy, it's really good to kind of copy and paste and then have them kind of give you a subtotal and then check out the different options for shipping. Sometimes when you can keep shipping under a kilo or under 2 kilos.
Yeah, 2 kilos I think is the magic number.
Right, exactly. You can save a lot and get kind of more express shipping. So instead of it taking kind of sometimes we'll see on some Chinese-based websites like the Slow Boat kind of 10-week like shipping periods where you're like, oh my gosh, that's just like forever from now. But you can get it if you're really like refined in what you're getting, and you're getting smaller things to the point where you can get a small package, and that's usually like what we've done in the past in terms of sampling. And once you have certain websites, like for instance Superbuy, they offer like coupons, or they offer kind of deals in terms of they'll give you a little more credit, or like kind of shave off the top of the shipping. I would say that calculating the actual cost gets to be kind of difficult in that territory, so I usually just go with if I have any sort of credit left over, I'll just flat out try to apply all that, and then use credit that I just brought into this system. So it can get complex because you want to keep track of things and make sure that that things are being ordered correctly.
Right. And the website does do a reasonable job of walking you through it and not tossing it all at you. It's kind of like Garrett said, you're taking links of the things you want to buy, you're pasting it into there, and you're saying, I want to buy one of this, I want to buy this, and then you check out, and it's like, okay, this is how much it costs.
Yeah. And so, James, we've probably been doing, like, Taobao ordering for 2 years, maybe two and a half now. How would you say you're, like, where you are? Do you think you're going to be doing a lot of ordering in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would say at this point I'm at about ordering from Taobao once or twice a year.
Sure.
The 11/11 sales, we're filming this in November, are coming up now, but I've been looking, and I'm not sure that there's a ton I'm terribly interested in buying. So it kind of depends on what sort of enters my radar. I only have this. We did a Taobao order in January of this year and sort of did what we mentioned, where we split up some packages and sent them out as sort of like a tasting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might be something that might do in the future too. It's kind of hard to say. So, yeah, I would say I'm looking at those things. And if there's ever anything that I do want to buy in some sort of quantity, then of course I will do that as well.
Sure, yeah. And I feel like I'm kind of in the same place in terms of just narrowing down my buying from when I was initially sampling a lot. And I've sampled a lot from those comfortable vendors, those vendors that have easy to use kind of formatting on Taobao itself, where I've gotten to the point where, like, I would have to take increased risk to try new things, and I'm just not maybe as willing to do that anymore, especially when like if I have other group opportunities to buy certain teas. I feel like I'm going to go with the group because, like, safety in numbers kind of thing. Right,
exactly. And to maybe give a more concrete illustration of how our group buy went earlier this year, either January or December of last year, is we basically picked 6 or 7 cakes that were somewhat higher risk. They were from anywhere from $100 to maybe $170, $180.
Sure.
And we ordered them. We had them shipped to Seattle. We broke them up, sent them out to 5 or 6 different people as well, and essentially split the cost. And it is a pretty reasonable cost at the expense of a bit of manual labor on our parts.
Right.
So ended up coming out to about $100 each or something like that, if I recall right. Which isn't bad for the tea quality. But that's something that, like, just in terms of my own willingness, I would only want to do every now and then.
Right, you got it. Yeah, it's definitely more of a splurge now for me.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about pros and cons.
Okay.
Do you have any pros or cons you'd like to point out?
Well, I would say that there's that initial kind of anxiety about having not experienced buying from Taobao. In terms of cons, I would say that there's kind of like that anxiety, that initial kind of like, I haven't done this before. Am I going to mess it up? Like, I don't speak this language. Will I be ordering the wrong thing? Will nothing come and I'll have to, like, try to request a refund? And once I got over that, I think it was better, but that's definitely an initial con for me when I was initially starting out. And I would say right now, in terms of cons, it's definitely skewed towards tea that has a factory label. That's maybe not necessarily factory tea, but if you're interested in that, that's great. But if you're not, maybe there's better avenues for you to find more interesting tea or tea that's going to meet your needs. But I would say Taobao is strong with that factory tea. So that's kind of like a pro and a con depending on who you are as a drinker.
Right.
And I would say now that as we were kind of saying earlier, now that we've kind of sampled a lot, we've had a lot, and we know more about, like, generally what's out there in terms of those kind of factory teas and those vendors that we're comfortable with.
And they tend to be cheaper on Taobao.
Yes.
And more options as well.
Yeah, so that's definitely a pro. And then, yeah, just as the con we were saying earlier with the idea that MX, or purchasing tea and having a ton of samples and going through that's really interesting initially, but once we're done, I think there's less places available to sample.
There's not a lot of places that are doing samples on Taobao.
Right.
Yeah.
So it kind of limits your variety after a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without having to go out and buy like full cakes of things blind.
Right.
So that's another thing.
Yeah. I've got a couple. One big pro, I would say, and I have not done this a ton, is ordering cheapish teaware on Taobao. I have heard of a lot of people having successes. One reason why you need an agent, some people can actually order directly from the actual Taobao seller, but because tea counts as a food product in their system, you're not supposed to ship it from China, and that's just the rule. Maybe it'll change in the future. So that's why you need to use an agent. But for teaware, that restriction doesn't necessarily exist. And the reason why I say cheap is because, yeah, you might be able to find some decent, more expensive teaware, but it's just going to be a bigger risk. With cheaper teaware, I think you could probably find stuff that's available from like Western tea vendor sources for probably a good fraction of the price, and probably reasonable quality, especially for the dollar that you're paying. There's going to be some associated risk there, but like these agents are good about packing up their teas and doing it because that's what they do for a living. So that is not a huge concern for me. One that is sort of a pro or a con, and I think we should talk about a little bit, is, and it kind of goes back to what you're saying about factory tea, is ordering something like dye there. And ordering dye on Taobao is something I would generally never do for most vendors. The one place where I will order dye from, I haven't actually, but I would, and probably a very good use of Taobao if you're into it, is Dye's Tmall, which is ordering essentially straight from Dye.
Straight from them, yeah.
So you know it is, or it should be legit, unless they're up to some seriously funny business. Right. So yeah, it's just dye.tmall.com, and so they'll have stuff like good prices on some of their ripe Pu'erhs, if you like the ripe Pu'erhs, or a good way to stock up on recent year raw Pu'erhs if you want to play sort of like the long aging game.
Sure, yeah, and so if you're wanting more younger stuff, I think that's like a perfect way of getting it, because you know you're getting the true thing.
Right. Yeah, and if you're buying dye, you're buying it because it's dye to some extent.
Right.
Yeah, if you're buying it and you think it might be a fake, you are buying a white label, essentially.
Right.
You're buying something that may or may not be, and maybe it's an okay tea for the price. I don't know.
An okay white label tea.
Right. But you should absolutely not be just searching for Dye 7532 2006 and buying the first thing or the cheapest thing.
Right.
Because you will definitely end up with something that is very well not legit. So so you need to know, you should either order directly from Dye or really know the source that you're getting it from is legit. Like someone came before you, or you know something about it. You have insider knowledge, essentially. So so that's a pro and a con for me.
Got it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I think we pretty much covered it. You got most of the pros out there. I know I kind of threw out a bunch of cons, but as you were saying, like the access to those factory brands was like definitely a pro for me.
Right.
So I would say, I think we pretty much covered what we wanted.
Right. And I guess one big pro, one last one, that kind of pairs with our last long video that we did about why the Western scene is so dominated with young Pu'erh, is that Taobao opens up access to a lot of teas, and a lot of them are aged, or semi-aged, or whatever. So if you are a Westerner that really likes these more aged teas, and you're just dying, just seeing more Lin Song or like Iwu teas from 2017 or 2018
Yeah.
being released, then Taobao might be a good avenue for you to explore rather than trying vendor number 7 that sells their own pressed young pu'er.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's all we got.
Okay.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Please let us know how you like this episode. Let us know if you have any other ideas for sort of these long-form podcast episodes. It's been a lot of fun to do, Garrett. So thank you for appearing.
You're welcome.
And we will hopefully see you guys next time.
See ya.